works. Can you hear me okay? Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
357. $357. Second Peter and you get into First John, I start singing this stuff in my prayers. You know, I think that's a good one for Wednesday night. Just across the page there, Redeemed, 356. Redeemed,
Normally I'll use the headset, but tonight I'm not. All right, good to see you guys this evening. Had a great vacation Bible school. You know, did a good job, and I'm sure you've told Grace that, and that's exciting. For us, the exciting thing is that one of the exciting things is that we asked our goal, our wildest dream that maybe we could get the offering to buy all the beds. We need 20 beds to be made, and sure enough, we did. We needed $1,000, and we got what, 1,150, something like that. So that's exciting. Got a little bit left over. Oh yeah, from July, and is it just July? Okay, since the last time, we're sending to the Rogers Baptist Association about $5,150 that's been raised for Sharon, and 68 cents. Don't forget that. We'll add that to the 88 cents that was on there. So that is just exciting. And we're going Halloween night, October 31st through November 8th. We'd like to take some people with us to help construct the building. Pastor Olu is on his way to Nigeria to build the foundation and start making the bricks. We have all the money for that, and so that's going to be an exciting time to get over there and build that. If you'd like to go, or you know of someone that would like to go, it's during those dates, October 31st through November 8th. The association is kicking in and helping out. If you buy your plane ticket, right now we think it's going to be in the area of $1,750. Then the association will pay for your housing, your food, and your transportation while you're there. That's about $1,000 a person. So that'll save us a lot of money. So if you're interested, know of someone who's interested, please let us know. We'd like to take at least 10 people with us on that trip. All right, my last Wednesday night with you is not with you, I'll be here, but as your interim pastor. And so maybe I won't go as long tonight as I did on Sunday, and you won't have to avoid the window so you don't fall asleep and fall out the window. All right, we're going to look at start with Genesis 37, and we're just going to move rapidly through the life of Joseph. And we're not going to read the scriptures. You know them. You can follow along. I'll tell you where we're at as we go along. We'll start off with chapter 37, verses 1 through 11. We see here that Joseph brings a bad report about his brothers. And it's interesting because he specifically points out the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. And it exposes this division in their family. Now, what is the big deal? Who is Bilhah and Zilpah? Hand servants, all right. Now, Zilpah is the handmaid of Leah, Sorais. So you can see there's a little conflict there. He's Rachel's son, and he's the handmaid's son. And then Bilhah was Rachel's handmaid. So in other words, he's saying, I'm the only son of Rachel. And this causes conflict in their family. He lacks this practical wisdom. He seems to follow along in the steps of his father Jacob. Joseph seems to be self-centered. He is self-focused. How do we see that? How do we know he has a problem with his self? You got to talk back to me. Had dreams. All right. He was quick to tell them about the dreams And of course, they got mad. You mean we're going to bow down to you? And even his father said, you think I'm going to bow down to you? They get, little mad at him. And the coat. Now, let's talk about that coat. We've always heard it as the coat of many colors. I have a problem with that. Yeah, it is. So I looked it up today. I don't know Hebrew that much, but I know how to look up and see what the meaning of the word is. And so if you will look up the meaning of the coat, it literally means goes to the palms. It means, I'll give you three definitions. Properly, the palm of the hand or the sole of the foot. By implication, a long and sleeved tunic, perhaps a wide one. The third definition, from the original sense of the root of many breadths. So it is something that goes to the palms. There's one little bitty definition at the end that says varied colors. And that must be what they picked up on. But that's not the meaning of it. The meaning of it is a long sleeve coat. Now when the kids got, parents take care of their kids, it gets cold, so they give them a coat. But it seems that Joseph received two coats. One to keep warm, the other was called I don't have the name for it, but it is the symbol of authority, of favoritism. The other kids were given coats without sleeves. And why would they give you a coat without sleeves? To work. Sleeves get in the way. And so you have to pull them up or tie them up, and you'll see even in the fishermen, if you watch The Chosen and things like that, they have coats without sleeves. That's so they can work. A long sleeve coat is not made for working. It's made for supervising. And so his father gave him that coat as the sign that he was going to be, in Hebrew, the Bekor. B-E-K-O-R in English. And that meant number one son. But who was the number one son by birth order? Reuben. And his father was showing favoritism, saying, not Reuben, Joseph is going to be the Bekor. And so that causes that rift. He has the dream, and that stirs that envy, and it deepens the rift. He talks about this head of wheat that will stand upright until the time of harvest, and then it will bow down. And at the time of the harvest, it's the tares that don't bow down. How do you tell the difference between wheat and tares? The tares stand straight up. The heads of the wheat are so heavy they bend over. And so you know the difference between wheat and a tare. And so that's how you tell the difference. So what impact does his favoritism have on Jacob's sons in their relationships? Jealousy, discord. We'll use the word today, a dysfunctional family. They were divided. They did not like each other. And they sort of separated because it was Joseph against the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. And so that just division in the family. Now let's go on to Genesis 37, verses 12 through 36. Joseph is sent by his father to Shechem to see if his brothers are there. Now there's a story about that. Why would he be worried about them being in Shechem? Well, it's because Shechem was a dangerous place. It was a place where violence had taken place sometime before. And so he leaves his friends and goes into this area where there's a lot of violence. And at one time, the men of Shechem were slaughtered by two brothers. And these two brothers were still in the area. And that's why he was worried about his sons. And so he sends Joseph to check on them. Now, listen to this. He said he asked Joseph to check on the peace of the brothers, not the health of the brothers. Why would he choose peace over health? What was going on in his mind? What? Fussing and fighting. You know, sort of. Are they fighting each other or what? He didn't say are they harmed. Are they fighting with each other? And so he gets there. He finds the brothers. They conspire against him. They throw him in a pit, and they go to sell him. And Reuben, who is the number one son, and Judah have a little rift at this point. What does Reuben want to do with Joseph? Yeah. Let's don't kill him. Let's put him in the pit. Secretly, he was going to come back, get him out of the pit, and send him home the back way, I guess. They're sitting around a fire talking, and what's Judah's plan? So let's make some money off the boy. Why don't we? He's not the Bekor. He's not the head. He comes up with a plan. Judah is so strong that Reuben sort of has to go along with the plan that he didn't come up with. And so he's frustrated because he's the number one son, but they're not following him. They're following Judah. And so he tries to operate as the Bekor, but it just doesn't work out. How do you think that betrayal affected Joseph in his life? Yeah. So he knew. So how else did it affect Joseph? Yeah, he had that memory. I'm not wanted. And I'm not wanted so much, they were willing to kill me. But they decided to make some money off of me. That's not real good for the ego and the self-image, is it? Especially after you told your brothers they were going to bow down to you. So I think it really did hurt him in that way. Let's talk about something practical. We have grandkids and kids. How do you affirm someone without creating these unhealthy comparisons? How do you do it? Because they didn't do a good job of it, did they? So if you want to build up one of your grandchildren, how do you do that without creating an unhealthy comparison between them and another grandkid? Don't compare them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, some of us, not with money, but with time, have a different problem because we have some grandkids that live close to us and others that live far away, and you're going to spend more time with those that live closer. So how do you balance that? I know my parents, they're not here so I can talk about them, they spent a lot of time with Beth's kids. They would go to Scott's football games in college. They would made a loan to them. It said after a while you don't have to pay it back, but she paid it back after mom and dad passed away. But they just spent more time. My kids were in Brazil. How are they going to spend time with them? You know, that's just impossible. But the whole family knows that mom and dad were really partial to Beth's kids, but we also knew that they loved our kids just as much. It was not a matter of love. It was, they were just sort of partial to them, and they were sort of closer. Randy's kids were in Texas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, the, yeah, call, video, FaceTime with them. Yeah. It's not the same. You can text them and so on. We have grandkids that text us back, and we have grandkids that never text us. You know, and it's just that's the way it is. But they wrestled with it and did a lousy job, and that's something that we can look at. We need to look at is how can we do that and not create these unhealthy comparisons. Okay, let's go on to chapter 39 and 40. Joseph finally gets into Potiphar's house. Potiphar, what was his job? Captain of the guard, the prison. Yeah. A lot of people believe, we have no proof of this, that Potiphar knew what his wife was really like. And he really didn't believe it. Joseph had done such a great job for him. He's probably gone through this before, but he knew that the penalty for attempted rape was death. He knew the severity of it, and he didn't kill him. He said, my second choice is throw him in jail. And so he sort of did that, I think, to protect Joseph, because he had been a faithful servant, and he trusted Joseph. He said, the Bible says he didn't worry about anything in his house. And so, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're speculating, but I think that could be rather good speculation, okay? Now, here's the issue. It says that God's presence was with him. So the question is, how do you interpret this? The Lord was with Joseph amid all the suffering. God allowed the suffering to go on. How do you interpret that? God gave him grace. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 God's not really angry with him. He never promises us that we won't have problems. He never promises that we won't suffer. In fact, he says you will suffer. All the disciples were martyred except for John. And they did suffer. We will suffer for his sake. And says that we sort of take up the suffering of Jesus as we go through this life. But he says, I will be with you. But I think we understand that God has a purpose behind allowing us to go through some things. He's building our character. He's building our strength, our courage to be able to withstand some things that we couldn't have withstood earlier. He matures us through our suffering and so on. I think we see some of this in maybe the upbringing of our president that allows him to withstand everything that he's had to go through and still stand strong. You know, something had to happen to give him that personality and that character to be able to take a stand and just keep going, take the knocks and keep going. This says that God was with him. Meanwhile, Joseph still struggles with his self-focus. Remember, we have the cupbearer and the baker that had the dreams, and he doesn't just leave it to the Lord, just take it to the cross and leave it there. He says, remember me, as though maybe he doesn't have quite all the confidence that God hears him, that God's going to do something about it. He said, maybe I need to help God out a little bit. So, yeah. Again, a lot of commentators think that there was a period of time, a year or two after the dreams, that he finally remembered and said something. And a lot of commentators I've read have said, that's Joseph didn't quite trust the Lord. He tried to manipulate a little bit, and God said, okay, you don't trust me enough, you're just going to stay a little while longer. Again, that's speculation. We don't know that, and that's not a hill to die on. So, but in this area, how does Joseph, where does he need to grow still? He's gone through with Potiphar, he's in prison, he's interprets the dream, but still he says, guys, remember me. But where does he still need to grow? He's still thinking about himself. Faith, trust God. God has a plan. God meant it for good. Yeah, he grows up a little bit in the end, doesn't he? He finally comes around to that point that you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Yeah. No? Maybe the first time he saw his brothers. Oh. Yeah. Maybe second in command, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. He did let him. So through all of this, there's this idea of scrutinizing, of the word is discerning an outsider. But it weaves all the way through the story of Joseph. You see, you scrutinize him. You scrutinize the story of Judah and Tamar when he refuses to give a son to her to get married, and then she dresses like the prostitute and has sex with him, has a baby. You see the scrutinizing that goes on there. We say that because at the end, we're going to see that Judah becomes the dominant figure, not Joseph. Today we talk about the Lion of Judah. We don't talk about the Lion of Joseph. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's this idea all the way through with Jacob and Tamar and Judah, this idea of deception. Let's tell the father that the wild animal almost killed him. There's the idea of favoritism that is involved in all of this. There's the idea of a dysfunctional family, even in their own lives. But quietly behind all of this, God's working. God has a plan. And if we look at this dysfunctional family, I think there's hope for us. I don't know any of you guys that are as messed up as they were. I don't know of any of your families that are as messed up as his family was. And so we see that God is behind all of it. Do you believe that history always repeats itself, or does God every once in a while break in and change things? Do you remember maybe in your family history a time when something changed in your family history? Salvation changing. Your kids got a new father. It changes the history of your family. I had a friend of mine that was a psychologist, and he talked to me one day, and he really liked me. And he said, "Don, you have changed your family's history forever." And I said, "Well, how?" He said, "You're the first one to go to school. You went through college. Got your master's. You got your doctorate. Your family will never go back to what you were before that." And it's happened that way. You know, my daughter has her doctorate. The son has his degree, and he's a pilot. My other son owns his own business, and they all make 3, 4, 5 times more than I've ever made. And the education-wise, they've all got college to some degree. And so God can break that cycle and change it. I wish I could remember his name. There was an evangelist that used to be an alcoholic. And he was so bad that when his son died, he snuck into the funeral home and stole his shoes so he could go sell them and get something to drink. And it just changed his life. And finally, someone asked him, said, "You have changed so much. Why are you always smiling? Why are you always happy?" And he just says, "I never forget the wonder of it all, how God changed me." And God does break into history. And so I think we can go back into our lives and see that difference. I see it when that sergeant invited my dad to church while he was in boot camp, and my dad became a Christian. And that changed our history. You know, we grew up in church all the time. So I think the application here is maybe we can just spend a little time looking at our family history and seeing maybe an area that needs to be changed, and doing something intentional to change that in your family. Break that chain. Say, it's not going to happen. It's going to stop right here. And you change your family forever. Maybe it's this week, take a step and offer forgiveness where it's not been offered before. Like Joseph forgave his brothers. And find someone that God lays on your heart that you need to forgive, and just forgive them. Maybe it's a truth you need to tell that's been hidden. And the truth needs to come out. Just like Judah did with Joseph. And we'll read it in a minute. And he says, "You got us. We tried to sell our brother. We tried to kill him. I take that responsibility. I'll take that on my shoulders. I'm the one that said, let's sell it." So maybe that can happen. So he got into the pit. Now let's look at getting out of the pit. Have you ever been in a pit? Some place in your life where you just got stuck and you didn't want and you wanted out? Been there, done that. Let's look at Genesis 41, verses 1 to 32. We see this idea of dreams and destiny and divine wisdom. Pharaoh has a dream. Remember, what was the first dream about? Cows and reeds. The second was about, second dream. Yep. Okay. The grain, and then he talked about the years connected to these past experiences. And so Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams pretty quickly. Now, he doesn't do it through this Egyptian magic, that they had. Pharaoh was pretty sharp. He said, I'm not going to tell you what the dream was about and let you interpret it. You tell me what the dream was about and then interpret it. And Joseph was able to do that. He drew from his personal experience, the dreams that God had given him. Isn't it interesting that in his early life he had the dreams, and now he's interpreting dreams? So he's had some experience with these dreams and interpreting them and what they mean. And God gave him some divine insight into all that. It was a supernatural revelation of the dream and a supernatural interpretation of that dream. And so Joseph begins to see his own story inside of this bigger story. I started out with a dream, and God showed me what that meant. And all of a sudden, here I am in prison in my life later on, and here comes the dreams again. Wonder if they have something to do with each other. He had a good life. Then he was sold into slavery, and then he got to experience success and prosperity. And that was a result of both dreams. And so there's a continuity that is going on here. So what does this say about how God prepares us through our personal experience? God will give it to him. And he had already had that personal experience of dreams earlier in his life, so God prepared him for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did. Who are you going to talk to in dungeon? You got to talk to God. All right. So go back in your own life just for a moment and see, don't you see some things that happened earlier in your life that prepared you for something later on? I remember when we were going to be missionaries 5 years, well, when we were rejected, we were going to go to the city of Florianopolis and be their education and youth minister for the state. And of course, we were turned down. And so I go, during those 5 years, I get my doctorate in education, and I moved from a church running 100 in worship to a church running 1,000 in worship. And I began to teach seminars through the state of Oklahoma in this area of education. And then when we reapply, they said, no, we're looking for people like you. And I go to, where do I go the second time? To Florianopolis, the very same place that we would have gone 5 years earlier. And because I got my doctorate, after a few years, we moved to Sao Paulo, and I was able to teach in the seminary. I couldn't have taught without that doctorate. So you see how God takes our personal experience, prepares us for something else in the future. And so that's what he's doing with him. So let's look at verses 33 to 45 as we go from the pit to power. He rises, becomes the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. But like his father, Jacob, Joseph is a complex person. He's flawed, but he's faithful. Share with me some of the flaws in Joseph's life, because sometimes we put biblical characters up on a pedestal and don't think they have any flaws. What were some of his flaws? He was a snitch. That's good. And what? A little bit arrogant. That he was. That he was. Yeah. stitches get stitches. You bet. Mm. Conceited. Yeah. You bet he did. Hey, along with that was prideful. That goes along with being conceited. He lacked discernment. He just let his mouth run. He didn't know when to speak and when to shut his mouth, and it got him into trouble. He had this superiority complex. I am better than you. You're going to bow down to me one of these days. He was just a little naive, wasn't he? Just didn't think about certain things. And he was a part of a dysfunctional family. And he was a major part of that dysfunctional family. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And that's something, go back to, I think we may have talked about it 2 weeks ago, that, yeah, his dad, Jacob, did all of that, but he did it for a purpose, because he, along with the birthright, was the extra portion. You know, he got 2 portions instead of 1. But it seems that that wasn't always on his mind, because being the Bekor, the number 1 son, you took on the responsibilities of the father. In that group, everyone worked to make the father successful. The father had them trained in different jobs and so on to support him and his family. Everything was centered around the desires of the head of the family. And he was willing to take that on. He's the spiritual head. And we'll see later on, yeah, he saw that. And so God can use someone who's a little too ambitious, in other words. Usually God doesn't, well, I say usually, he can change them, but God uses people that are a little ambitious, that want something different, that are not satisfied with the status quo. Paul was exactly like that. Very ambitious. Yeah. And he was the Hebrew of Hebrews, but who did he use him to witness to? The Gentiles. He didn't use him to witness to the Jews. He used him to witness to the Gentiles. And so he loved to debate, he loved to argue, and God didn't change that. When he became a Christian, he still loved to argue and debate. And God used that in his life to make him powerful. Okay, back on the subject. So his youthful pride, his lack of wisdom, his failure to understand others' emotions caused real relational problems in his family. But his story is not defined by his flaws. His story is about growth, maturity, and humility. It's what God did to soften him and to use him, to make him really usable. Ultimately, God brought about reconciliation through him. So God shaped his character through his suffering and responsibility, turning him into a wise, compassionate leader. It's sort of like Sharon and I went to a conference once, and he described marriage, or your wife, as heavenly sandpaper. It's irritating, but it smooths the edges. And I'm sure we do the same thing for our wives. Okay? And that's what God was doing with Joseph. He was smoothing him, and he had to use some suffering in order to get him there. And so the good thing about him is that he chooses to face the famine instead of run from it. He could have hid his head in the sand and sort of ignored it. He could have made sure that he was protected, that he had food for those 7 years, took care of himself, but he didn't. He sort of suffered to do it for the entire nation. And God took his focus off himself and onto a nation. And his leadership was no longer self-focused. You're going to bow down to me. It became rooted in compassion and strategy and calling. And God changed the man and used him. And he does that to us today. So the application is, what's God calling you to? Where do you need to dig in and prepare for something that God's getting ready to do in your life? Now remember the story of Abraham. God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's walking off, and he looks at the other angels and said, "You think we ought to do this without telling Abraham?" "No, let's go tell him." And he did. And God tells us what's coming down the pipe. He tells us to get ready. Now, we don't know everything, but he shares with us what is going on and why he's preparing us. And so we don't need an answer, but just go back in your life and see the things that you went through and how God prepared you for some of the things that you're doing even today. The skills that he gave you at an early age that you're using for the Lord today. So let's go to Genesis. We'll look at chapter 37, 39, and 41. And we see some patterns that are repeated. Joseph's life follows this pattern. There's dreams. There's gifts. We'll call it the coat of many colors, but it's a long sleeve coat where he becomes the Becker. There's betrayal, and there's restoration. And we see this repeated in his life. There's dreams, early and late. There are gifts that are given to him. I think one of the gifts was working for Potiphar, and had given all that responsibility. And then all the gift of being the second in command. There's the betrayal that comes in all of this. And then there's the restoration. He's restored to his family, and God just does some amazing things in that. So in each scene, we see the pit and we see the prison. We see the coat of authority, and then we see Pharaoh dresses him to be the second in command. We see the dreams. All of that is repeated with this divine reversal and redemption. And Pharaoh becomes sort of a father figure for Joseph, yet Joseph's ultimate loyalty remained with God's promises. He respected Pharaoh for all that he did for him, but yet he was faithful to the promises of God. So what does that say about God's ability to redeem and rewrite our stories? He can do that, doesn't he? He redeems our life. He rewrites our story, just like my friend told me, "Don, you're rewriting the history of your family." And it's proven to be true. And you've rewritten the life of your family by your faithfulness to the Lord. And what your kids and your grandkids see in you. And you're still rewriting that history of your family. So, application. Are there some generational patterns that you want to see reversed in your life? Generational pattern of lying. "Oh, she's my sister." The son, "She's my sister." All the way through. There's lying, there's deception, and so on. And God needs someone that'll come along and say, "That's it. That's going to stop in my family. It's not going to go any further." And you do what you have to do to be able to stop that generational pattern. And you've got to learn how to trust God to redeem the parts of your story that are broken. need to trust the Lord to redeem the parts of your life, of your story, that are broken. Where there's fear, where there's distrust, where there's uncontrolled anger, where there's conflict and division, not talking, things like that. We've got to trust the Lord to be able to redeem that and to change those things. Let's get on. There is also the Judah's transformation and his path to reconciliation. Remember, Judah had a daughter-in-law, Tamar, whose husband died, and he said, all right, you just go stay in your house, and when my sons grow up, I'll give you a husband. And he never did do it. And so that's when she dresses like a prostitute, has a child through him. That humbles him. That breaks him. And God has taken that story, that broken story in his life, and God's getting ready to redeem it. He stands before Joseph, and Judah steps up, not offering someone else, but he offers his own self. What did he do when they threw Joseph in the pit? Who did he offer up? Joseph. Let's sell him. But he gets here, he doesn't offer up anyone else. He offers up his own life to protect Benjamin. Joseph sees this evidence of change in Judah, and that opens the door to forgiveness and to healing. Here's what Judah replied to Joseph. Judah replied, how can we plead? How can we justify ourselves? God has exposed the iniquity of your servants. We are now my Lord's slaves, both we and the one who was found with the cup. We're guilty. Confess. And then in verse 30, he says this, if the boy is not with us when I return to your servant, and if my father, whose life is wrapped up in the boy's life, sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. Then your servants will have brought the gray hair of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in sorrow. Indeed, your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father, saying, if I do not return him to you, I will bear the guilt before you, my father, all my life. Now please, let your servant stay here as my Lord's slave in the place of the boy. Let him return with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father without the boy? I could not bear to see the misery that would overwhelm him. He's not offering up anyone else. This is where Judah is transformed. He's faced with the fact, he admits the truth. It was guilt. I am the one that said, let's sell the boy. It's my fault. I told my father, if I don't bring Benjamin back, I'll die. He took that responsibility. You see the change in his life? What does Judah's transformation teach us about repentance and responsibility? Necessary. All right, here's part of the truth too. Sometimes we put on a mask at church, right? Everything's okay. How are things? Yeah, they're really not. We're good at faking it. But God doesn't deal with the fake you. God deals with the true you. And he was willing to admit the guilt, receive the responsibility, take on that responsibility. And God used that. And so we've got to just be honest with God. We can't blame it on anyone else. And so that's how forgiveness opens the door to a new legacy. Because as I said, from at this point, Judah, well, when Judah got them to sell Joseph to the traders, from that story up until now, Judah is not with the family. He goes someplace else. He marries Tamar, or he marries and has kids and all of that, separated from his family, and he comes back at this point. And so forgiveness gave him a new legacy. No longer is Joseph the main feature. It is Judah who's the leader. The Lion of Judah. The tribe of Judah. So maybe the question is, who do we need to forgive? Who do we need to be reconciled with? And see what God can do in our lives. Reflect on how God, with your pain and your suffering, can be a blessing to someone else. You've gone through what they've gone through. And so here's the final reflection. Joseph had to decide which father figure, Pharaoh or Jacob, he would follow. And he chose God's covenant, asking that his bones be taken back to the promised land. And that was his act of faith. God is going to take us into the promised land. So the challenge, are you building your life around God's promises or some temporary position? Sometimes it's a lot easier to build our lives around these temporary positions. And the last question I want to ask you is, what legacy are you leaving behind? Are you intentional about leaving a legacy? I am going through, I've been doing it for a few years, but I'm getting a little faster at it now, writing my life story. And I'm majoring on the times that God spoke to me, the times God moved in my life and changed my life and the direction of my life. I want my kids to be able to see that. And I think I told you that when we went down for my birthday, I had the whole family there, and I said, I've got you captive. I want you to hear from my lips my story. And so I told them some of the highlights of how God spoke and how God moved and changed my life. I'm conscious now about the legacy that I'm leaving behind for my kids. And I would challenge you to do the same thing. It's a lot easier now. You can go online to Otter, and you can get in front of the computer and you can speak, and it'll write down all the words for you. And then you can put it on Chat GPT and say, make this better, and it'll rewrite it for you and make it better English. there are some advantages to AI. All right, let's take a look at our prayer list tonight. We're already past time. Now, let me just tell you this. This has been my thing. I do not know that Josh is going to continue this. Okay, so next Wednesday, I don't know what he's going to do. I gave it to Chloe, and if he wants to do this, he can. If not, he won't. He'll do something else. Health concerns, we added a few things. Last time I left off Mary Hope, but continue to pray for her. Have you talked to her since Sunday? Okay. Anybody? Okay. Still weak. Yeah, she fell when she was here on Sunday. Yeah, she fell and hit the back of her head out in the parking lot. No? Oh, he's on the stage. Okay, yeah. So she was hurting, and we had prayer with her before she had to play. You could tell looking in her eyes, but as she played, but she did a great job. Sharon, you're having ablation on Friday? Okay. I told her husband, I said, if the physician is standing when he does the procedure, she'll get a standing ablation. That's poor, isn't it? That's poor.